right?
Yep.
What do we get? What do we need? And what do we give? I want to set out to try to answer these questions. First, what do we get, or what should we expect to get from belonging to Road Faith Tzedek? Daniel Mendelsohn once wrote an essay titled A Critic's Manifesto. He described how, as a teenager, getting the New Yorker in the mail each week opened new worlds for him, orienting him towards the adult he longed to become. In it, he discovered the critic Helen Wendler, whose essays revealed that poetry was about more than feelings. Mendelsohn realized that criticism wasn't about a thumbs up or a thumbs down. It was about uncovering what a form is capable of, not what to think, but how to think. When the poet James Merrill died, Wendler wrote with sorrow that her life had been diminished. She would no longer be able to look to his poetry to guide her life. Reading that, Mendelsohn wrote, he wouldn't be around to show her how to grow old. I read this with astonishment. So that is what poetry is for, to show us how to live. Mendelsohn thought he was talking about poetry, but to this reader, he was talking about Judaism, naming what Judaism has always known, that it teaches us how to live. Our guide in that is halakha, not law, but a path. As Arnie Eisen once said, roads are paved, but paths are carved. Or in Rabbi Brad Artson's words, halakha is the choreography of life. In community, we pray, we eat, we schmooze, we comfort and connect, but not as ends in of themselves, but as steps along that path. The point is walking it. Halakha is a way of moving through the world with others, with purpose, and with help. And that path, it protects you, literally. We live in a globalized, impersonal world where so many are sad and alone, and that's compounded by a world that is hurting. Younger generations are turning to technology for companionship, only to find deeper isolation. Yet here, you matter. Here you count. You are cared for, whether you give a lot or you give nothing, whether you come every week or only tonight. Here we lean on the simplest technology that can never be simulated, but can always be shared: human connection. How tragic is it that synagogues have not been better at telling this story, at offering this rationale for our existence, that we exist not primarily to speak to God, but to each other. Not to fulfill religious obligation, but simply to count. This should be plastered on our exterior walls. Have connection will travel. Many of you came tonight to fulfill religious needs out of memory, familial connection, or for some sense of continuity. But just as many came to scratch a perpetual human itch: only connect. Belonging here gives you something bigger than yourself, and crucially, a place to make your world bigger rather than smaller. It gives you real, tangible tools for how to live. Hearing our speakers on Rosh Hashanah talk honestly about aging, beyond highly specific support groups, where else do we get this? Where else are we exposed to conversations on aging across age ranges? Where else are we entered into that conversation on how to age towards a more meaningful time on the path rather than merely existing or trudging towards its inevitable end? And tomorrow, we will hear reflections at Yizkor on death and loss, on grief and memory, but also on how to live. And they'll be offered with honesty, with love, and with care. And in listening, we are drawn closer to those we have known for years or those we have never seen before. And in that process, something profound happens. A community member lifts up something that is deeply personal and particular, even as we negotiate our own memories, drawing out what is shared. This is Judaism in action, beginning with the local, but moving outward, ending with the global. And we do this here all the time, sharing your story, whether that story is about death, about providing care for those both ill and forgotten, about your child coloring on the floor in here, about infertility and miracle twins, about how we wouldn't be here without our 5th grade teacher, about saying no to raisins and challah, but yes to gefilte fish, about working for reproductive rights, about letting go of our 4-year-old as they ride without training wheels for the first time. We are a people above all else who value stories. And like the Passover Haggadah, we tell ours and then we retell it. And then we weave in others' stories like midrashim that help us make sense of our own while giving our children the tools to write theirs and then rewrite it. Here, when you or a 13-year-old stands up here on the bima, sharing your truth, it is held with the same reverence as when we stand up here chanting the ancient stories that were passed down to us from on high. What we have here is rare. Relationships across generations that guide us on how to live. These are not static lessons, but living, reciprocal ones. Some may find that with family or with a mentor, but only in community do these relationships endure and expand beyond solitary connection. Of course, it is not perfect. We disagree on how to sustain community, especially in these dark and difficult times. Some want to be Jonah, running from fear, hoping distance will make it go away. Some want an ark, sealed tight, keeping only what's familiar safe inside. I want us to remain in conversation, not because we will finally settle on whether prayer or social justice is truer Judaism, if we should scrap the prayers for the country or we need to recite them now with even greater urgency. Not because the perfect answer will emerge, but because it might. Because running never works. Arcs may keep us afloat, but only by shutting others out. Last week, what we saw at Rosh Hashanah, whatever we might want to call that, was a countercultural act. 6 services, dozens of community members leading us in song, in prayer, storytelling, and Torah teaching, and more people in this building than in many, many years. And we did this not out of obligation, not out of guilt, and certainly not by debating who is right, but by embracing uncertainty and choosing presence. This brings me to my second question. What skill do we have here that the world needs from us? The answer is, of course, a pursuit of justice. But how do we do that? Tikkun olam is a beautiful phrase, yet it is too vast, too diffuse. When the task feels impossible, failure pushes us towards fatalism, and often towards vilifying those we disagree with. Instead, we need to refine the scope of our mission, because in these times of crisis, that path towards justice feels both charged and obscured. We need to narrow the lens, not fix the whole world, but to work faithfully on ourselves, individually and communally. The reverberations will ripple outward. The aperture will turn the focus from the particular to the universal. And that is how we create an impact that feels it might just become olam-like. So what is the skill that we have? It's the ability to talk, to have real conversations. And too often we dismiss this, reducing it with Ashkenazi humor to arguing and Yiddish-like jokes. But conversation is something that we do, and we do it well, and we know it's not about winning. My aunt, Rabbi B'nai Lappi, taught me a chiddush, a new way of seeing an old text or an old idea. And in this case, it's a Talmudic debate between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. Just a little primer, the Talmud, the sprawling project that gave legal, political, and social and religious life to Jews after the destruction of the Second Temple. Hillel and Shammai were rabbis of that early period, heads of great academies, the Harvard and University of Chicago of their day. Throughout the Talmud, they stand as foils. Hillel offering empathic, often more lenient positions, Shammai arriving at strict conclusions through a letter of the law-inspired logic. In the text my aunt shared, they are again locked in dispute, the details of which matter not. The discussion is what endures. The Talmud records that after years of back and forth, years of debating what Rabbi so-and-so said in the name of so-and-so, along with proof texts and the digressive paths taken, finally, a heavenly voice intervenes with a verdict. These and those are the words of the living God. It's wonderfully anticlimactic. You can almost hear the students and the anonymous editors who preserve this story banging on the narrator's door, needing to know, saying, yes, but who is right? At last, the voice adds, the law follows Beit Hillel. And why Hillel? Was he or his students smarter, more pious? No. Because, said the voice, they were nochin ve'aluvin. When I first learned this text, we translated these words, nochin, as kind, and aluvin as humble, which follows a long tradition of understanding it that way. From this, Hillel's halacha seemed to grow out of menschlichkeit, as if to say the point is simply to be nice and the law will follow. That's at least what I was taught, and maybe you've been taught it that way too. But the chiddush, my aunt pointed me to Rabbi Menachem Frisch, who offers a more accurate, albeit challenging reading. Here, he says, nochin does not mean nice, but flexible. One who is willing to be moved beyond their current position. Aluvin does not mean humble, but humbled. One who is willing to reconsider their truths. For Frisch, halacha, our way of walking through the world, thrives only in conditions of real disagreement, where a plurality of opinions is not just tolerated, but valued. And crucially, for debate to bear fruit, to extend beyond the academy, beyond the Beit Midrash, beyond the court of public opinion, disagreement is not enough. Someone must be willing to change. Someone must be willing to be Hillel. This teaching is not about being meek or politely smiling past differences, and it does not mean that both sides are equally right. It's about courage. The courage to listen, to shift, to risk being changed. The chutzpah to think that we are right. The chutzpah to know we might not be. Resilient communities are built when at least someone is willing to do that work. And here, we do this and we have been doing it. Someone here was willing to say, maybe instruments on Shabbat will be joyous. Maybe kashrut allows for treif sandwiches to be made for those in need in the atrium. Maybe we should be egalitarian. Maybe my politics can differ from the rabbis. Maybe we should let people on the bima in any colored suit, even no tie. It is our sacred duty to practice this skill and to project it outward, to hold ambiguity and uncertainty, to walk in when we're scared, to sit next to the person whose politics angers us. Because if we can be humbled, so might they. At the same time, we need to be clear-eyed. Of course, not everyone seeks dialogue. Some in power, in media, and even in community want only to dominate, to own those they disagree with. But most people want more. More meaning, more honesty, more connection than the world is giving them. We must try to model that. Give our children a glimpse of what the world used to be like and might look like again. But we have to try. It is an unprecedented time. None of us knows how to proceed. None of us. There is no playbook. None of us can free the hostages. None of us can drop food into Gaza, restore vaccine funding, or end ICE raids. But all of us can broaden the circle of our conversations. Each of us can lean on curiosity rather than stridency. Each of us can work the muscles of Hillel and enlarge our hearts. Each of us can dare to make a space where even now, even today, that heavenly voice might still be heard. Now my last question. What is my role in leading us here, in activating these skills for us here and out in the world? Zadie Smith, in her essay on optimism and despair, spoke to a moment that felt much like ours. She resisted the pressure for easy answers and leaned only on what she knows. She said, if novelists know anything, it's that individual citizens are internally plural. My business, such as it is, concerns the intimate lives of people. That's my business too. You have given me the privilege of seeing the intimate lives within this community. The multitudes you contain, the identities you conceal, the contradictions you carry. Being a rabbi means standing in the fullness of that, the good, the bad, the extremes of both, and everything in between. It is my duty to illuminate that, to remind you that the person that you're sitting next to is more than a doctor, more than a grandparent, more than someone who is alone or someone who is always full of cheer, more than a labor organizer or an economist, more than a millionaire, more than a family of those who sway to the Kaddish. We are all of it, all of them, all at once. If we already had the answers, we wouldn't be here. There would be no need for halakha, no need for Judaism. But we don't have the answers. And we need to be reminded of that. And as a reminder, the tradition offers us the Torah. And it tells us, read it. And then read it again, and read it again. And we do this not because the very words of the Torah are sacred, and certainly not because those words are going to change. Moses is never going to enter the land. Esau will never hear that he too is blessed. Hagar will never be treated as Sarah's equal. But we do it because we change. These stories, hearing them repeatedly, open us to new ways of reading our own and hearing our neighbors. Because there is a sanctity in our plurality. And my job is to remind you that you need this. Every one of us needs community. Maybe you know it. Maybe not yet. Maybe you will only discover it in the winter of your life when ambivalence collapses into grief and the community shows up for you at a shiva, or joyfully heaves candy at your child's bar mitzvah, or shows up to your book talk. You need it. This is the only sermon I ought to give, and I ought to give it every year. Because this is the whole point. A shul is so much more than a place to pray or to gather. It's protective. It acts like a sukkah, covering us with meaning, companionship, and with purpose. And our presence here, 151 years after our founding, is and always has been about connecting us to these possibilities of what happens when we show up. So show up. Not because it feels better when the room is full. Not because if you come, your friend will come. Not because you want your children to have this. Not because I want a pat on the back that someone is listening. Not because it will fix what is broken. But show up because your life will be fuller. It will be better. And it does not stop with you or me or us. Because these connections you would not have imagined to be possible, you form bonds you did not know you needed. Because for a fleeting, restful moment, the world might slow down. Because you might find something in yourself. And because that moment need not be fleeting. This is what we get. This is what we need. And this is what together we give. Gamar Chatima Tova.